the cloud. Hi, Teresa.
Oh, I was so mad. I forgot last week was Tuesday. Yes.
Okay, there was something else I think going on last week that was
Oh.
getting a lot of attention. So no worries, no worries. But I'm really excited to see you guys tonight, of course. Hi, Lisa. Welcome. So tonight the theme, of course, is vampires. Moving along with our Halloween theme. So of course I had to go with my dearest love, The Lost Boys, and I know I speak also for Holly on this call, and I'm sure a few others, that this is just like my iconic teen vampire deliciousness. So let's just kind of like dive right in, because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to vampires and tarot. So first of all, the vampire trope is very personal for me.
Is that you, Sasha?
So back in the 90s, when I moved to New York to be an actress, one of the first jobs I got was these center pictures. It was this show called La Commedia del Sangue. It was a live vampire show, and we would perform all over the city in cabaret clubs, in S&M clubs, and it was like back at the height as goth was just like coming out. An Interview with a Vampire was huge, and so it was like this very exciting time where we actually, in the Village Voice, you could contact vampires, people who supposedly really lived that life. And then I went on to star in a bunch of B horror movies. Through the Red. So that Addicted to Murder like got into Blockbuster, and then I was in. So it was like a crazy, awesome '90s vampire era. So, what small authority I do have to speak about vampire tropes obviously comes from my deep love for the genre and just for vampire energy in general. I love it. And as it turns out, and of course, this was such a I freaked out when I realized the tremendous connection between the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot and vampires came from the fact that Pamela Coleman Smith, the illustrator of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, was hired as a very young artist. I think she was maybe 18 or 19 years old, was hired to work at the Lyceum Theater by none other than Bram Stoker. So what's fascinating about this, what's so interesting, so Pamela Coleman Smith was an American, and her father got her this interview with the Lyceum Theater not long after she left college. She was going to art school in Brooklyn at Pratt. And she hit it off with Bram Stoker magnificently. And she was immediately hired. So one of the reasons that the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, I think, is so accessible to people is that one of Pamela's first loves was always the theater. So she was hired as a scenic designer. She painted sets. She worked as an extra. And when her father passed away, not long after she started working for the Lyceum, she essentially, the theater became her home. She moved to London. And so she was part of this like marvelous theatrical group, which they were like the #1 theater of the time, right, in the West End in London. Now, if you look over here at these pictures, this is Henry Irving. He was the star. He was the Lyceum Theater. And I'm speaking very casually and broadly when I'm saying that essentially Bram Stoker was Henry Irving's biatch, in that he was constantly in the shadow, constantly seeking attention, constantly trying to satisfy Henry Irving, who was, by all accounts, just kind of a terror. And so when Dracula came out, a lot of people will say, and you can look at the image right there, that that Dracula, the blood-sucking vampire, was actually based on Henry Irving. What was interesting about the connection between Henry Irving and Bram Stoker is that Pamela Coleman Smith was also kind of adopted by the leading lady of the Lyceum Theater, whose name was Ellen Terry. So this would be like, she was like the Meryl Streep of her time. And so people will often say that Ellen Terry is the figure in the Nine of Pentacles, that a lot of Pamela's artwork actually is Ellen Terry and Ellen Terry's family who took her in. So there are these interesting, very mother father slash maybe lover intense relationships, all of which wind up deteriorating, except for the relationship between Bram Stoker and Pamela Coleman Smith. So what's interesting about their creative collaboration is that even after she left the Lyceum Theater, she still continued to work and stay close with Bram Stoker. Now, most people think that Dracula was a smash when it came out, but that's actually not the case. Dracula, the novel, came out to excellent reviews, but it didn't sell well. And so Stoker died practically penniless and without much acclaim at all, because it wasn't until the films began, it wasn't until the movies that Dracula became kind of like this worldwide sensation. So interestingly enough, he shares the same kind of fate as Pamela Coleman Smith, who also dies long before the Rider-Waite-Smith deck explodes and sells millions of copies. So neither Bram Stoker nor Pamela would live on to kind of see their work come to life and become beloved by millions of people. And it's funny because, I have chills talking about this. It's exciting, right? It's interesting because Bram Stoker, he kind of, although of course there was centuries of vampiric folklore, but the vampire that has been handed down to us and kind of, the Western world all has its roots in Bram Stoker and his stories. And our tarot decks, while of course that's on top of centuries of other decks, you'll still hear almost every deck is a Rider-Waite-Smith clone, right? It was Pamela's mark that somehow like laid this space with which we could all find ourselves within her artwork and within the way that she and Arthur Waite designed the cards. Again, her theatrical background making it very accessible to anybody who looks at the cards to understand exactly what's going on. So there's actually a very deep root. And the other thing I just want to bring up, because I think this often gets lost, or you'll see it in a book or in like Wikipedia, and it's just kind of jammed together in one sentence. But think for a moment like any kind of group you're a part of, like say us, for instance, right? Think about this Golden Dawn who, at the time had Pamela Coleman Smith, Bram Stoker, Arthur Waite, who of course is famous for the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. He wrote over 20 occult texts, but only the Rider-Waite deck became famous. You've got Aleister Crowley, of course, who was quite famous at the time. Ernest Hemingway wrote about him. Everybody knew who he was. And William Butler Yeats, who would even go on, and we were talking about the tower earlier. He bought a tower. His commitment to the Golden Dawn, to the way that they interfaced with the invisible world. He was a very active member. He was very passionate when things started falling apart. He passionately kind of crusaded to say, look, you guys, the work we are doing is so important and we're calling things down. And if we don't do this carefully, we could unleash terrible things upon the world. It's just really interesting about these energies that came together. And because they often so look like these stodgy old men, it doesn't, I just think it's an exciting kind of building block pot of awesomeness that is just often overlooked, as is the tarot, because at the same time as they're all hanging out and doing their magical work and scrying and doing out of body, this, that, and the other thing, and working with the tarot, and they're essentially like, if you look at uh, the tree of life and all of that stuff, right? You're really working with the psyche, the dweller on the threshold. At the same time as these guys are hanging out, you know, at the turn of the century in London, Freud and Jung are just coming to the forefront, right? So psychology, which is only about 110 years old, right? We think it's always been around, but it's a very new science, is coming out at the same time they're doing this occult work, which is essentially doing the same thing, but in a different way. And then, of course, you have the explosion of postmodern art in London and Paris at the same time. So these are all of these pools of creativity, innovation, and it just is, I find it very compelling and exciting. So back to their publishing timeline, Stoker published Dracula in 1897, but he didn't hire Pamela to work until 2 years later at the Lyceum Theater. So I think she left the Lyceum around 1905, but they were still kept in very good contact. The Rider-Waite-Smith deck is published in 1909. And then, of course, Pamela illustrates his last novel, The Lair of the White Worm, what is that, 1911. So she continues on with she continues on to have a great relationship with Stoker. And I was fortunate enough when I was writing the complete book to Rider-Waite-Smith to go into the New York Public Library, into their special collections, and I was able to look at handwritten letters by Stoker, pamphlets written by William Butler Yeats. They have a whole, they really do, their younger curators and librarians are very into the occult, and so it was fun working with them. I was able to take things out of the general collection. Pamela Coleman Smith would design the playbills for the show, and there was a playbill for one of the Lyceum Theater shows that was circulating in the general collection. I was like, no, this has to be in the special collection. So it's really fun, and a lot of these things are digitized. If any of you guys are interested in like sleuthing through libraries, a lot of this is available and online for you.
Oh, love it.
So cool. It's so cool, because and the curators and museum people often don't know what they're looking at, and so they're really excited if someone can come to them and say, no, this is something that you want to put in this specialized collection. They're so grateful. They're just so grateful and so open. So yay, librarians. So I want to talk about the pop culture of vampires, which is kind of the tradition that we see in the films, because there's so much to talk about when it comes to the vampire. So I'm just going to go the movie route for tonight because our time is limited. So the first vampire movie ever is Nosferatu, which came out in 1922. And it was a German expressionistic silent film. And he ripped off Bram Stoker's Dracula. So all he did was he kept the story the same and changed all the names. He changed Dracula's name to, I think, Count Orloff. And Stoker's widow, who of course died when he died, he left nothing. She sued the filmmaker, and she won in court, and he was supposed to destroy every copy of the movie, but of course, thankfully they weren't. So there we see the first Dracula in the movies. And then we see the official Bram Stoker's Dracula with Bela Lugosi in 1931. Now, both of these iterations of the vampire are as the evil other, which we were talking about last week when we were looking at demons and darkness. And the interesting thing, and one of the reasons I think that the vampire legend is so beloved by so many, is that you can pack so many different meanings on. Certainly you can deconstruct the vampire in a homoerotic way, in a regular erotic way, but I think for all intensive purposes, for these films, and also the next film, which, oh my God, this messed me up so hard, so hard. Again, it's Stephen King's Salem's Lot, which wasn't really a movie. It was a made-for-TV movie, but I put it in with the movies.
Book was great.
Such a good book,
Oh
right?
yeah. It had me scared, and I was an adult when I read it.
I was like upset. I was so good, so good. And I think that, and if memory serves me correctly, Stephen King really plays upon that exact same thing. This mysterious coffin arrives by the cover of night. It's the evil other. It's the immigrant. It's the outsider who takes up residence in this lovely town, and then all hell breaks loose. And of course, I always thought the most terrifying thing was the child at the window. I don't think we had maybe ever seen a child vampire, and children are so scary anyway, right? When you're looking at kids possessed by demons or ghosts, or they're like, because they're so close to the other side. So to see that child vampire scratching at the window, begging his brother to come in, oh, lordy. So we've still got the scary other. We move on to Interview with a Vampire. The book, I think, was published in the late 70s, and again, didn't gain traction. I read it probably in 87, fell in love, and suddenly the scary other becomes the introspective vampire. The vampire with a conscience. Of course, that's Louis, right? And so we look at the human sides of what it suddenly means to be the undead, to be the walking dead. Then we can just fast forward quickly and move on to the beefcake vampire. Now, if you ask me, Interview with a Vampire, they were beefcake vampires too. But at this point, we've got the vampire in diesel jeans and in your high school homeroom, hotness. I got to appreciate it, because why wouldn't you go there if you could? But one of the interesting things that I realized, and I hadn't realized that until today when I was putting this together, is that in all of these, most of these films and stories, we see love triangles. So in Dracula, of course, you've got Mina engaged to Jonathan, who's being held hostage by Dracula. And in The Lost Boys, we have, beautiful Star, kind of held against her will with Michael, who she really wants to be with David, who of course eventually rescues her. In Interview with a Vampire, although it's not quite as romantic, but there's definitely interesting undertones. They form a family as Louis, Lestat, and Claudia, the 12-year-old vampire who never grows.
My name.
Claudia. And then the famous love triangle in Twilight and in the Vampire Diaries as well.
Love that.
Wait, who just what?
I love Vampire Diary.
So good, right?
Obsessed.
You're obsessed? I'd love a show of hands. How many people here are obsessed? Because I know some of the rest of you are obsessed with it too.
Come on, Larry.
Come on, Larry, cop to it.
Well, you've left out my favorite, which was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie.
I knew somebody was going to be like,
oh, I love that movie.
Is there a love I'm not familiar with Buffy. Is there a love triangle in that one too?
Yes.
Not really.
Well, yeah.
Buffy's awesome though. That's a great flick.
The TV series was all right, but the movie just had me in stitches. It was
that's
wonderful.
right. Movie didn't have the triangle, but the series did.
But I thought the love triangle thing with vampires is interesting because, it speaks to this kind of the female choice between this like intense power, and I think Twilight was often criticized for being like like a girl who just throws it all over for the big strong like alpha guy, but I love a good love triangle, so it may come up again later tonight.
Oh, I had a question. What about, I think it was called Bram Stoker's Vampire, the one with Keanu Reeves was in it?
Francis Ford Coppola's. Yes, with
Oh yeah, that one.
with Winona Ryder and Gary Oldman. I have something oceans of time. So that's so funny that you say that. I was actually, of course, like, so I was dating the guy that was playing the head vampire in that vampire play that I was showing pictures of. And we went to go see that movie on 19th Street when it came out on 19th and Broadway. And we were all so excited, right? And
what's the name of it again?
Bram Stoker's Dracula. That is the actual name of it, Bram Stoker's Dracula. I remember, like, no vampire movie was good enough for us. We all thought we were too cool for school.
I think that one is the best, the Bram Stoker.
Do you?
I love that very much, yes. Something I want to tell, Sasha, you were talking about Pamela. That's quite nice to observe in the Rider-Waite-Smith. That looks like some scenes are all on stage.
The stage, yes.
If you look at the tarot, you know, some scenes, they are on stage.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. I have a section in my book Tarot Diva of actually how to use the stage cards to, and maybe I could do that at some point. We could go through them because if you notice that any of her cards are on a stage, then kind of your next level of deconstructing them. And so I'm trying to remember. So like, definitely the Two of Pentacles is a stage card. The Four of Wands, I believe, is a stage card. Anyway, when you recognize that it's a stage card that you're looking at, you can bring another level to your interpretation by bringing in, okay, is this a show that I'm putting on? Who's in my audience? You know, is this an act? Like there's all of this theatrical stuff that you could bring in and look at the cards from different points of view. And thank you for bringing that up, Claudia, because stage cards are, they're really they're really mysterious. They don't make sense as to, like, perhaps was she designing the cards and at first thought she would put them all on the stage, because one of the things that Pamela was known for were these mini theaters. So if you look at this photograph actually of her, and I think this was taken out of the Brooklyn Eagle newspaper, she would hire herself out to light candles and tell like folklore stories at parties. And she would often do that when she entertained in her home. She would, like, you know, this is back in like the time of Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, right? So everybody's throwing open their doors and having the artists over and drinking like crazy and doing all kinds of like whatever. And so she was always like entertaining. And one of the things that she had were these miniature theaters where she would, and so the stage cards literally look like her miniature theaters. So yeah, it's a mystery why she didn't include more or why they're there at all. But it's interesting. What time is it? Can somebody tell me? I don't have my phone.
It's almost 8:30.
It's already almost 8:30?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
27.
Really? Oh my.
9:27 here.
5:30.
What'd you say, 5:30?
Yeah.
We have plenty of time. Let's order a pizza and get some beer. So of course, does anybody watch What We Do in the Shadows? The show?
Yeah, we have seen some of it.
They have a hilarious,
corny.
so corny. It's so corny and it's so silly. And they have, I think, the best representation of a psychic vampire. But when we're really looking in our lives at how a vampire can show up, if vampires are those who feed off of your life force, and if theoretically, let's just say, for shits and giggles, that the place you always want to be in is your high priestess self, right? You always want to be kind of like centered in who you authentically are, with your like eye on the prize of why you're here and what you want to do. A psychic vampire, anyone or anything that takes your attention away from the awesomeness of whatever you're doing, I think could be considered a psychic vampire, in that way that they're literally taking from you. Like, I'm not talking about a child or your family or your friends, but that like that suck, that energetic suck, that of course we all play a part of when we allow those people into our lives. So it was very interesting. I might talk a little bit longer tonight, and we'll just save it on the back end after the readings. But I was talking with a friend the other day about, she was talking about how her grandfather's been coming to visit her at night, in her in-between space of not quite awake and not quite asleep, but that she said that there's something else there that doesn't feel safe or it doesn't feel right. And she's just built this tiny house for herself. So we were talking about how she could sprinkle salt around the perimeter and some magical ritualistic things she could do to protect herself. But then there's this idea that like with energies, it's just like any other relationship. And, you know, you can absolutely 9 times out of 10, if you ask something to leave or tell it to get out, usually it will. And it just reminded me of the whole, you know, a vampire has to be invited in before it can get into your house. And I think the same is true of a psychic vampire. You usually know. You usually get a warning sign, a warning bell, whether you pay attention to those warning bells or not. Of course, that's up to you. So I wanted to speak to that. All right, really quick. I just want to talk a little bit about the essence of vampires as we can see them in tarot cards. So of course, the first thing that leaps to mind is the Judgment card. It's the card of transformation. This is the crux, whether it's your protagonist, his story or her story of becoming a vampire, and what, like, you know, the young, not vampire yet, is like maybe dreaming of or wants, is that essence of transformation. And of course, on the traditional card, we literally have people rising from the grave, rising from the dead. So I think that this idea of it, and most importantly, in regard to the Judgment Arcana, is that the Judgment card signifies transformation so complete that you never go back again, right? That's why it leads to the World card. This is not something you ever move back from, the same way as when you're transformed into a vampire. There's no one doing that. The whole suit of wands, to me, has the vampiric quality. It is fire, it is life essence, it's red like blood. That's my King of Wands in the Haunted House Tarot. So it is everything that is the life force, fire, energy. And it's, of course, what makes vampires so incredibly compelling. Vampire qualities, we also see super strength, so we can look into the strength card to see those qualities of mad strength. Erotic attraction, erotic. Vampires are so sexy, right? And there's also this element of choice, and sometimes they take that choice away if they're kind of playing with your mind, which brings us down to like the psychic ability that vampires have, which is interesting to think of the High Priestess as the archetype of a vampire in terms of psychic ability. The mind control that a vampire will exert over its victim. And I've never looked at the Eight of Swords as mind control before, but I think that's a worthy, interesting meaning. The fact that vampires traditionally can only walk in the reflected light of the moon, of course, never in the sun. So the lunar landscape is that of the vampire. And of course, then the immortality, which we can look at the Ace of Cups as being an elixir, as being a fountain of youth, as being that kind of always like ever bubbling freshness. So for tonight's spread, I thought we go with the love triangle. Now, the interesting thing, and I had a really good time when I tried this spread out for myself today. The interesting thing about love triangles in general, and again, we can equate this back to numbers on tarot. So if for all intensive purposes, we look at you as the number one, and the number one, of course, equates with the magician and all of the aces, right? When there's one thing, that's it. Like at first there was nothing, and then right there's something. Like the light turns on. Here you are. You exist. So that's why an ace is a seed. It's the beginning of something new. It's the appearance of something new. It's the start of a cycle. As soon as you have the second thing, you have duality, right? So the number two, suddenly you are reflected off of something else. Suddenly there's energy moving between the two things. Suddenly there's a reflection, there's a mirror, there's a companionship, right? So it's this groovy, awesome thing. The moment, a third thing, oh, where am I going? Ah. The moment a third thing arrives, suddenly we have creativity. Suddenly we have complexity. Suddenly things get really, really interesting and really, really, really creative. But also suddenly there's someone who could be like on the outs, right? There could be this imbalance. So what's required? What is required when you have three things together? Typically in all of these stories, the female chooses one. But it takes a lot more complexity to integrate both. And I'm always, always for complexity. And I think that might be also why vampire love triangles are so often found. But what I'd like you guys to think about when you do this spread, and of course you can do any spread you like, and any question you like, but it doesn't necessarily have to be romantic. And that's why for the second two cards I wrote, thing one and thing two. Because whether or not you're engaged in a love triangle, and God, I hope for all fun and purposes, maybe you are, like a fun love triangle. But I do think that we are often torn between opposing just issues, things in our life that come up for us all of the time. So in the course of this spread, when you look at the two things, you're kind of torn between. It may be behaviors. I mean, who knows what the cards will suggest when they appear. The question for you is really going to be, should I give myself over to one of these two things, or can I integrate them both? Right? Are the two things that I'm torn between, are they two good things? Are they two oppositional things? Are they maybe two sides of the same universe, and you're leaning more to the dark than to the light, or to the fear rather than to the expansion? So this is an interesting spread, and I'm excited to put you guys into your rooms. Do you have any questions about this before?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
So you were saying we're gonna decide if we should go with one thing or integrate the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's, so the question of the spread, like the cards will be laid out with you up top, and then the two things you're torn between. And and so unless you're looking for something specific, I'll see what comes up, and then see, is there a choice that you need to make for one or the other, or is your work to integrate these things? Can you, and if you need to integrate these two things and they're not integrated yet, then hopefully your reader can give you some great advice as to how can I comfortably bring these seemingly oppositional things closer to me, so that I can be more fulfilled. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Does anybody else have a question? Nope. All right. So 12 participants, 6 rooms. Easy enough. All right, guys, you know the drill. And I'll see you in 15 minutes.
We're back.
We're back.
Was it as good for you guys as it was for me?
Yes.
Great. I love it. I love the element of surprise. I love never knowing, you know, who you're going to be.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
Yeah, it was really good. I like that spread.
It's interesting. It's interesting. It'll be fun to see if most people chose to integrate or to get rid of something.
Well, I think with my guidance, I need to integrate it because, well, no, I need to let go of one of them. That's right.
Let go of something.
Yeah, I need to let go of and concentrate on that. I need to let go of the Nine of Swords and keep the High Priestess.
Oh, hell yeah. We all need to do that.
Yeah.
Good advice. Very good advice. How are your readings, guys?
Amazing. I could stay talking to Gina for 3 hours more.
You're more than welcome to connect again afterwards. Right? I can just leave the room open for anybody who wants to like.
Hey, can I share something fun?
Please do.
I was so excited when I saw the theme was Lost Boys. Like, I downloaded the soundtrack to my Pandora because it's like my favorite 80s soundtrack.
Me too.
It's that one song that stands out above all of them. Cry Little Sister. That's it.
Yeah, there's so many good ones. Like when somebody's like 80s, I'm like Lost Boys. I was like, so I was so excited when I saw the theme on that.
What does it remind? I mean, that was like my friends had all just gotten their license, and we would drive around all night and smoke cigarettes and like blast that soundtrack, right? That's what I mean. It's so, and again, it's so a Cry Little Sister. Like I think about it from like my daughter. Well, it's so good. It's so good. And then the saxophone player, that buff saxophone player with the 80s.
You know, he used to tour with Tina Turner.
Oh, did he really?
Oh.
Yes.
A friend of mine, she's Brazilian. She was a dancer for Tina Turner.
Wow.
Really? That's so cool.
A Brazilian girl.
That was a good soundtrack in the 80s too, or that was a good cassette back in the 80s to really gauge myself too.
Yep. I had the cassette. I had it.
I got the Tina Turner on a music video many years ago, 30 years ago.
It's amazing.
Sorry, I know that was off the subject of tarot, but I just had to share because
I'm so glad. If you guys want, we could do just a Lost Boys. We could break that down and put it into tarot. I love that movie so much.
Well, I was going to say earlier, vampire subject, that might have to have a part 2.
Yeah. Should we do part 2 next week?
Yeah.
Yes.
or even slaying vampires. You know?
My stock is ready.
You're like, don't make me throw all of this stuff away. All right, rounding up to 9 o'clock, so I'm gonna keep everybody's precious time in mind as I pull a card for all of us for the week. And I'm actually gonna say, one of the best things about a vampire, right, is they are strong and sexy and supernatural. So what is going to help us stay strong and supernatural and sexy this week? Ooh, and it's the King of Pentacles.
Ooh.
So speaking of things, I noticed the way Claudia brought her accessories with her, as well as Ginger was also showing us her delicious vampire-y things. So yeah, like kind of like vamp out with, I don't know, whatever makes you feel strong and supernatural, like deck out your place, maybe get some new kind of like vampire energy, like candles, incense, essential oils, because the King of Pentacles is so like about stuff and like building up his place. And yeah, and then of course,
The garlic necklace.
very nice.
It'll also be the 13th, so you can bring up the card 13.
Oh, next week will be the 13th?
Yep.
Next Tuesday?
Amazing.
Can we talk about buff werewolves too?
What?
Buff werewolves.
Buff werewolves? I might have to like have you teach that class because I don't know all that much about werewolves.
There's a couple buffies.
Huh? For some movies, I should do some
I-
research.
On the original werewolf movie, and the werewolf's going through this town, and this little old lady says, "The way you walk is funny." And I had a cat who just passed away this year for 22 years, and she walked funny. I'd always say that the way you walk is funny.
Yes, we'll do anything you guys want, any theme at all. So own your super strong sexiness like a king owns his kids. And you guys have an amazing week.
You too. Thank you, everybody.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you,
Love
Sasha.
it.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Gina.
You're welcome.
Bye,
Tanya.
everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye, Earlene. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Can't leave. There we go.